Liberty Counsel successfully defends a pastor in Miami. Hi, I'm Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. We'll talk about this on Faith and Freedom with Matt Barber, vice president of Liberty Counsel Action. Matt, this is a case where we've talked about before on Faith and Freedom, but I think it bears repeating and focusing on this a little bit more with this pastor in Miami-Dade County, Florida, where the superintendent has now backed down, fortunately, after we sent a letter. But he was threatening the revocation of the lease of this pastor's church, Impact Miami Church, solely because the pastor spoke in his Sunday service and spoke about homosexuality. And the superintendent said, well, that violates the so-called bullying policy of this particular school. And as a result, he was going to review the lease and see what he could do, threatening essentially that he was going to evict this church from using the public school facilities. Outrageous as it is, fortunately he's backed down, but it's unbelievable that the church was being threatened because of what the pastor preached in the pulpit.
Well, and here we have, and the damage is already done. Here we have a government official, Alberto M. Carvajal, who is the Miami-Dade County superintendent, and you have officials within that administration threatening or saying that they're going to investigate this individual, this pastor, at a church at the school. They're leasing, just like any organization is allowed to do. They can't discriminate against churches. They're going to investigate him for a very innocuous, some comments that he made about homosexuality, which throughout the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, is considered to be sin. Every major world religion, thousands of years of history, recognize homosexuality as sexual sin. Well, for that alone, they investigated him. Well, that has a chilling effect, even though they realized, I think, that they couldn't, that the First Amendment prohibits them from kicking this church out of the school. They still, the shot was fired over the bow. They investigated him. I think that's the goal here, is this has a chilling effect so other people sit up and take notice and say, boy, is it worth the trouble for me to preach the truth of Scripture about homosexuality if I'm going to be investigated for doing so?
That's no question. That's one of the goals. And fortunately, we made this superintendent back down. But what we want to make sure is that other pastors are not intimidated. Yeah. What this superintendent was threatening would have been clearly unconstitutional. But despite what the law is, sometimes government officials act in a way contrary to the law, and if you don't challenge them, it becomes essentially the de facto law, the law that's applied in that particular situation. So if we hadn't been involved and the pastor was intimidated, or other pastors would be intimidated by the superintendent, that's essentially what would have happened. The good news is that that didn't happen. The fact of the matter is, though, here's this pastor, and what ultimately happened to start this was that he and some other people from the church went to a local city council meeting, and they were ultimately opposing this particular matter that was going before the council. As a revenge against them, somebody went to the church with apparently the government, and they went to the church and they tape recorded the pastor's message, and then they gave it to the superintendent. Well, the pastor's message was about part of it. He mentioned homosexuality, and he said, some people ask why I address this. It's because the fact that
I have the exact quote right here.
Yeah, go ahead and read it.
He said, the reason why I'm dealing with homosexuality so much is because there is an aggressive approach by gay theologians that says the Bible never spoke about homosexuality in a way that contemporary Christians understand it. It's all over. It's on the YouTube, it's on CNN, and it's on 60 Minutes. They are not just saying accept us, and I believe we should protect and not bully and treat all people with dignity and respect, but they are going beyond and above to change the very meaning of Scripture. That's what he said. Truthful in every word, innocuous, harmless, elevates even people who are struggling with homosexual temptations, and says that they need to be treated with dignity and respect. Absolutely, but for that alone,
and not bully them,
and not bullied, but they want to silence all opposition to homosexuality.
That's right, and the reason why he was addressing it is because some people he's saying are distorting the Scriptures by essentially saying that the Scriptures don't either speak about it or condone it, and twisting the very meaning of Scripture. And so that's why he, as a pastor, is addressing it. The quintessential reason for pastors to speak is what is relevant and what the Bible specifically says. And that's what he's doing. And so this superintendent, after looking at this and listening to this tape, for him to even think that this was bullying and that he had the authority to revoke or modify this lease is absolutely unbelievable. It's just mind-boggling. And then he didn't just do a letter to the pastor. In fact, he didn't do any letter to the pastor. What he did was he went out and did a press conference.
Yeah.
A press conference. So what's this superintendent trying to do? He's not sending a letter saying, I got this message and we're reviewing the matter, which would be wrong in itself. He goes out and he does a press conference and gets this information out to the media.
Yeah, who's the bully? Who's intimidating? That's what this is. This is an official, government official bullying and intimidating a pastor, trying to silence the First Amendment, trying to silence this gentleman's right to free speech from the pulpit because he disagrees with the message. We saw this happen with the Chick-fil-A thing with Dan Cathy. The secular humanist left, the radical left, is determined to silence any opposition to viewpoints that they happen to hold near and dear. One of them is sexual anarchy and sexual relativism, embracing all sexual behaviors as good, normal, natural, and they will not stand for people who happen to preach the truth about sexual morality.
You're right. And so I think one of the things that people ought to understand is that this is unfortunately not an isolated incident, that this happens all the time, and this is the direction of the homosexual agenda. This is the ultimate end game, is to silence any opposition to the contrary. This particular church, the Impact Miami Church, is a church just like other institutions and entities that lease facilities from the Miami-Dade County School District, and it meets on the North Miami High School campus on Sunday. So it actually has a lease, and other secular entities can lease or use the facilities as well. So in that respect, Miami-Dade is like a landlord. And for them to revoke or even threaten to revoke because of the viewpoint of the pastor is simply unconstitutional. But one of the things we want to make sure that people take away from this is that silence is not an option. We have a program that we have called Silence is Not an Option. We'll talk about it on one of the Faith and Freedom programs. But silence is not an option in the face of this kind of hostility. Dr. Jerry Falwell, for example, ultimately spoke up on the issue of abortion when he realized that the government was bringing this issue to the church, and that as a pastor and as a Christian, he had no option but to speak up on this issue. And I think what we're seeing here is we as Christians, people who believe in moral absolutes and morality, need to speak up. We don't have an option to remain silent anymore.
Well, that's right. And another thing to take home from this is, as you mentioned, this happens. This is not an isolated incident. It happens all the time, everywhere. Some of these cases come to our attention, the attention of Liberty Counsel. How many don't? People need to let us know. Give us a call at 1-800-671-1776. If you even hear of this kind of thing happening, let Liberty Counsel know. What if Liberty Counsel had not been there to get this administration in line here and get them back to adhering to the First Amendment? If we weren't there, they would have continued to trample over and bully this pastor. So people need to keep in contact with Liberty Counsel, lc.org, 800-671-1776.
That's a good point. And we've got a packet called Silence is Not an Option. It contains a DVD and also this handbook on political action of pastors and churches. I encourage you to go to lc.org and order your copy, or call 800-671-1776 and ask for a copy. Make sure that you get it out to your pastor and church leaders and other nonprofit leaders. Silence is not an option, and pastors need to speak up from the pulpit regarding these major critical moral issues. And this talks about what pastors and churches can do with regards to political activity with respect to candidates and legislation or marriage amendments and other matters. Make sure that your pastor can exchange the muzzle that people want to put on him and instead put on a megaphone. We need to make sure that pastors are speaking truth and they understand that they're able to do so from the pulpit. As for the Silence is Not an Option packet, also go to Liberty Counsel's website and sign up for the WIN, Women Impacting the Nation Conference. That's lc.org, coming this September.